Back. Okay, now I think we are all set for the next plenary session. And in this one, we will focus on individuals' agency. The title is Individuals' Agency, Sexual Crimes, and the Example of Supporting Infrastructure. So what do we actually mean by that? This morning, we have discussed terms, trends, and patterns of crime in public places. And obviously, keeping a close eye on these things is actually fundamental for research and policy. But it can be easy for us to forget that sometimes just research, statistics, and trends, policy, are actually about real human beings, with families and friends and jobs and lives they have carefully put together over the years. People like you and me, people like Ida Johansson. On an August day in 2015, Ida went out for a run in her local park, here not very far from Stockholm. She never came back. In that public place, Ida was murdered. She was 20 years old. Her death was reported in the newspaper and the media. But attention was less on her, on the help that she actually, her family got from supporting, perhaps from society, and much more on the teenager. The focus was on the teenager who murdered her. And while thousands of people took to tracks across the country to pay tribute to her and to show defiance in the face of fear, there was little discussion about how places like that particular park could be made safer for women like Ida or for all of us. We have with us today Ida's mother, Corinne, who has been involved in making a film about her daughter. A teaser of the film will be screened by Johanna Ost here today, and she will tell us a little bit more about her experience in working with this film. We are also going to have a change in the schedule because Anna Möller is not able to take part in this session, which actually is about showing examples of what is the good infrastructure in society. And the center for instance, the rape center in the hospital in Södersjukhuset here in Stockholm is just an example of the kinds of good infrastructure that is there for us when something horrible like this happens. Unfortunately, Anna is not able to come here, but I'm very glad to say that we have just an equal good example to show us that particular feature about how society can pull together support for those that sometimes become a victim of crime and are victims of violence. So we will going to listen to the work done by Women's Shelter in Sweden. Here we have Jenny Wetterstrand, who is the president of the National Organization of Women's Shelter and the Young Women's Shelter, ROCKS. So I'm very happy that you can talk about the kinds of work that is done by this organization. So before we move on, Karin, thank you so much for being here. And will you please tell us a little bit about Ida?
I would like to start by thanking Professor Vanja Sekato for inviting us to speak here today at this conference. Tack. Ida never came home that night after she went jogging. From the moment we picked up the phone to call the police for help, her fate quickly became known throughout Sweden. Our greatest loss covered all newspapers, and her story became the property of everyone. When it turned out that the man who took our daughter's life was a madman, neither known to Ida nor us, media became fascinated. TV shows, podcasts, radio shows, and newspaper articles were published. I never before reflected on the huge publicity crime and criminals get in our society, and it disgusts me. My family's greatest loss has become entertainment for others. All the media coverage focused on the crime, and somewhere along the line, it subconsciously moves from entertainment to a type of terror propaganda. Because women dare not run alone in jogging tracks. They are asked to not run with music playing in their ears. Women are offered courses in self-defense. Today we have come to a point where women have to choose between safety or freedom. This is Sweden, a country seen by many as one of the safest and most equal countries in the world. Why do these criminals receive so much attention? I rarely think about the murderer who took Ida's life. He does not deserve my attention. Instead, I use my energy to remember Ida. She was here to do great things. She was our daughter and Frans and Alva's sister. She was wonderful, and she was needed. With this film, we want to shift the attention away from the criminal, who does not deserve it, and rather focus on the good people. The good people who were constantly by our side to help us through the shock once evil struck us. The people that we call the good forces. We want their actions to be an inspiration to others. During the Viking Age, Swedes raised runestones to commemorate beloved family members. Many of these runestones are preserved in Upplands Väsby, where we live. This film can be seen as a modern runestone in memory of Ida and the people who have done good things to make sure that life will continue after Ida. Thank you for listening.
So now we have a few words from Johanna Öst. You can present yourself.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Johanna Aust. I'm from Sweden originally, but have lived in Germany for over 20 years. I started running during my years in the US in the late 90s and have continued to do so. I love it. But I only run when it's light outside. The parks in Berlin, where I live, are poorly lit, which feels like a warning. Stay away from here or suit yourself, whatever happens. I've always been scared of the dark, but try not to let it control me. I'm also a mother to a daughter. And the thought of her growing up in a world of fear, the way that I did and do, is pretty tough because it's so restrictive. But the thought of something happening to her is, of course, even worse. When I read about Ida in the newspapers, I was shocked like many others. And when a friend told me that the family wanted to make a documentary, I contacted them and we met up. I want to show the reality for crime victims and their families and highlight the effects that violence has for so many, and to see the strategies to comfort, to act and make change, instead of just be scared, protect yourself, and take detours. What does the fear of being exposed to violence do with the freedom of women? Even though there are more men who suffer from violence and assault, it is women who discuss pepper spray and assault alarms on different forums. It is women who talk about strategies to run, to go to concerts, and get home from work on the bus on your own. It is women who adapt, who dress safely, cooperate, take a taxi, call each other when they get home, and basically never go anywhere alone. Press and media report diligently on rape, sexual abuse, and murder. Of course, this is both good and bad. The problem is made visible, but as Karin said, the fear is enhanced by what we hear in radio, watch on television, read in the newspapers, and see online. Scary details that feed the entertainment industry that exists around crime and murder are described in the media in the same ways as stories in crime novels and thrillers. For those who have been exposed and their close ones, it becomes extremely painful. But is there another way to tell these stories? How can you make a movie about a murder without being voyeuristic and further traumatize everyone involved? Of course, what happened to Ida is mentioned in the film, but the focus is on the memory of her as a person, her spirit, how her attitude towards life affected many people, and how it's carried on now after she was taken away by a complete stranger. Ida was strongly committed to fight against violence and to the weak people in society. And although the family chose not to speak to the press, they do not mind for her to become a symbol in the fight against violence, since they are convinced that this would have been her struggle. The goal is for this film to be part of what the family calls the good forces. It will be based on the people who engaged themselves in different ways and started initiatives. In the interviews, we will discuss their commitment. So in the recent years, I've been meeting with those in Ida's vicinity who've been able to tell, and I've been touched by their strength and trust. I've also talked to different experts on violence against women. Above all, I've been touched by a family who decided early, in spite of the grief and misery, to raise a runestone for Ida, and giving me the chance and opportunity to get to know her and them a little bit, and to make this film. So thank you, and we'll show a trailer of 5 minutes.
Ida skriver 1 september 2008. Ingen kan ana att jag gillar att vara för mig själv. Jag gillar bäst när det är mörkt ute. Jag skulle aldrig klara att någon i min närhet dog. Ida skriver 1 september 2008. Ingen kan ana att jag gillar att vara för mig själv. Jag gillar bäst när det är mörkt ute. Jag skulle aldrig klara att någon i min närhet dog. Ida skriver 1 september 2008. Ingen kan ana att jag gillar att vara för mig själv. Jag gillar bäst när det är mörkt ute. Jag skulle aldrig klara att någon i min närhet dog. Det är jobbigt att träffa andra. Och jag förstår att de tycker att det är jobbigt att träffa mig också. Därför att man vet inte vad ska man säga till en mamma som har förlorat sin dotter på det här viset. Vad ska man säga? Det finns ingenting att säga.
Och när man vaknade och folk frågade om jag kände någon Ida Johansson, så var det ja, men det är inte hon. Det kan inte vara hon.
Om du googlar Ida Johansson så får du jättemycket träffar på våran Ida. Men det handlar inte om Ida, utan det handlar om vad hon utsattes för de sista minuterna i sitt liv. Och det handlar om gärningsmannen. Och det är ett missbruk av Idas namn. Och det hon har åstadkommit i livet. Och han förtjänar ingen uppmärksamhet. När Ida togs ifrån oss så var det så otroligt många människor som trädde fram och gjorde goda saker. Och det är de som förtjänar uppmärksamhet.
Man hamnar inför väldigt många mycket märkliga situationer i det här yrket. Som de flesta människorna är lyckligt ovetande om att det existerar. Men det här fallet är ju något som man kommer att bära med sig. Liksom.
Jag tänker fortsätta göra det som jag älskar och jag tänker inte låta rädslan stoppa mig för jag tror att då blir du begränsad som människa och då blir du inte lycklig.
Jaha, då kör vi. Ja, vad tyckte du om Julia?
Jag sjöng för kvinnor som får ta emot slag från sina män. För kvinnor som måste täcka över sina kroppar. Jag sjöng för flickorna som inte får gå i skola. Och jag sjöng för min dotter Ida som hade levt idag om hon inte hade varit kvinna.
Okay. I would like to take the case of Ida as an example to try to break the taboos around cases like that. So it's important to spell out how things happen, I think, in reality, but also I think one case can really exemplify hundreds, thousands that many of you already know that may happen in our midst, among people we know. So we would like to take questions for you, mostly on the filmmaking, if you have right now. Well, the focus of this session is about the support that is giving to people. So if you have any questions, you may address to Johanna, for instance, or to me. Okay. Then I would like to pass the word to Jenny Wennerstrand, who is responsible for the ROCS, which is the Organizations of Women's Shelter. If you may want to make other questions, we can take at the end of this session then. Okay? Thank you.
It's of course hard after this film, and I would like to thank you very much for making such a film, putting focus where it really belongs. The shelter movement is looking with horror upon the way that violence against women is turned into entertainment. And it's important for these initiatives, so thank you very much. I'm going to talk about ROCS, the National Organization for Women's Shelters and Young Women's Shelters in Sweden. I will address what we are doing, thank you, in our work and the challenges that we can see today towards the infrastructure on violence against women, because we see that we are part of this infrastructure. We have a history that goes back, but how do the future, what does it look like? Do I press or? Thank you. Var, vet du, är det? Där, va? Ja. Nej. Okay, this is for something else. Sorry, don't look. So, this is it. Yeah, the early women's shelters in Sweden was founded in the first ones in 1979, Ada and Beda in Gothenburg, dealing with physical and sexual violence against women. Today, Beda is called RISE and is a national organization against sexual violence against women and girls. And in 1984, ROCS was founded. And the shelter movement from the beginning, well, it started as shelters somewhere, but it wasn't always shelters involved. And I think that's very important to remember. They came about due to associations of women meeting and discussing their experiences of violence in everyday lives of women. So it was very much women coming together and talking to each other about what it was like to live as a woman. And as I said, not all of these groups had any shelters. They came along the way. And it was a lot of reading, studying, and talking to each other, and sort of getting to realize that many experiences was shared. And it is and was also a separatist movement. It's only women and girls that are allowed to join, but men can, of course, support us, but we are a separatist movement. And ROCS is performing about 10,000 measures each year, the women's shelters. That is phone calls and helping different kinds of things. I will go into what soon. And between 600 and 1,000 women and as many children come to our shelters each year. It goes up and down depending on how many shelters we have as members, of course. But this has been the flux through the years. And the girls' shelter movement, they don't have shelters, but they do a lot of supportive work on the internet and over the phone, and they are the largest support giver in Sweden over chat and internet, Tjejjouren.se. And I should say that Tjejjouren.se is dealing a lot with sexual violence. It's a big issue that the girls that are calling them need to talk about. An important ground for the shelter movement is what we call the process of normalization when it comes to violence. It's a researcher from Norway, Eva Lundgren, who I've been working with a lot, and we also did shall I say, infamous Swedish study called Captured Queen, Slagen Dam. That was, it was a national prevalence study trying to see the scope of violence against women, both outside and inside intimate partner relationships. Because, and this conference so very, in such a good way, puts focus on that it's not only inside relationships that violence goes on. In order to understand the women, though, because this shelter movement, we address especially women who are exposed to violence in their relationships. In order to understand what the woman is going through, the process of normalization turned out to be a very useful tool. You can, in short, say that the woman tends to externalize the violence. When she is hit, for example, and when she's abused, she doesn't tend to address the man. It's not his fault. It's something else external to the man. It's that he's unemployed, or he was drunk, or he was sad, or so. It's not the man. The violence is not about him. And gradually, as the process goes on, the woman tends to think that the violence actually is about her. She is doing the wrong things. She's causing him to use violence to correct her, or to ease his tension because she's so annoying. And so she internalized the violence. It's her fault. And then gradually the violence is normalized. She tends to see it as something that is part of her everyday life. And this is also made by the man that he tends to isolate her and also shift between violence and warmth. So after a while, the man is a very important source for her reality, and she tends to sort of think that what he stipulates is also the truth about the violence. And this might sound as if the woman is just a victim, but we have very, very strong stereotypes in Sweden and in other countries about who is the perpetrator and who is the victim. And it's hard to identify as being. I mean, if you have a job, you are a perfectly smart and able woman, and you have a man who is also liked and have a social life, to think of you as the couple where he is abusing you is very hard for many. So this process can come along quite, it sneaks up on her, and then the violence causes her to think that it's her fault. So this is a very important source of knowledge that has shown to be very useful when we meet women who come to us from a violent relationship. And what we are giving the women who come to us, it's of course that we are very firm and strong and says that it is not you. Your life may be chaotic, but it's not because you are a chaotic person. Your problem is the violence. It's not you that is the fault. We give her these tools to see herself in another light, to look upon herself with new eyes, not the violent man's eyes. And we also are it's very important that it is the woman that makes the decision. We don't say, you have to leave your man to get our help. We don't put these demands on her, and we don't shame her for the choices she makes. She might go back to him, but we encourage her to leave and to find other ways of understanding what she's been subjected to. So that is a very strong core in our movement, that the women themselves are the ones that have to decide, because they are the ones who are going to create these new lives. So we can't take the lead, but we follow her and we support her all the time. And coming out of violence is also a process. It can take quite a long time. You can leave the man physically, but still you can be within his world and hear his voice and look upon yourself with his eyes. So that takes a lot of time and effort as well. So, when women are taking the step, it might start with phone counseling. Women can call to our help phone and talk get advice, support, or just comfort. And she might do that for a while. She might join a support group if she dares, if she has that, if she's in that stage, or that might come later. But leaving home is often also a process where she makes contact before she leaves. And maybe when she leaves, it's because of a very acute situation, or she might just feel, I don't know if I'm going to break up, but I need a break. I can't stand being called these things. I can't stand being pushed around. I have to gain some strength, so I'm leaving now for a week or a day or what. So it's not always that she knows what she's doing, but she just knows, I have to get out now for this, in this situation. And this also means, as I said, that it's her decision and that she is motivated when she comes to us. She wants a change, or at least a break, and we work from there with her situation. So what do we do then at the shelter? Well, can be about everyday life. Some women have not had their own bank account, so we go to the bank and with her and help her with that if she needs that. Sometimes a woman can feel very unsafe to go out. She might wonder where the man is or his friends or so. She just wants company. She might not be very terrified, but still she needs someone to have as a friend or as a protection in some way. We also support women who come with children as mothers, because it's very usual that the man has been debasing her a lot, being a bad mother. You can't take care of your children, you're useless, you're bad, So we help her to see herself as a good caretaker and to strengthen her in relation to her children. And also, of course, we take care of the children and support them and speak with them, and we see what they need. Yeah, I'll get back to that. But we also make contact with authorities. Custody cases are, for obvious reason, not unusual within our work. Once a woman is breaking free and can speak about the violence, see it as violence, she often does not want her kids to be with a violent man. But it's not always the case. In some cases, the women are very keen on the contact between the man and the father. That also happens. But we, of course, are seeing to the children's interests, so we report to the authorities the way we should do always. The social securities, it could be also social services, it could be medical stuff, to get her counseling if so, professional help if that is needed. And we give support in samtal in Swedish. I don't find a good word in English. It's not counseling in that professional way. And I will say more about that. Because, as I said, we're based on that it is the woman who is making the decision to come to us. But we are also very much clear that we are not professional in the sense that the authorities are. We have a knowledge about violence that society has not had for many, many years. And we have shared our knowledge with society, which has led to laws like gross violation of women's peace, for instance. I should also say the prohibition of buying of sexual services, where the shelter movement was very active in pushing for that. So we are clear about what we know and what we can do is not within the professional line. We are women working with meeting women and finding connections between us. It's shared experiences. This doesn't mean that we're not experts on violence, but we're not professionals in the sense that the authorities are. We want to have contact with the professionals so they can learn from us and the things we know. And we also want to address them and make their policies change sometimes. And we have two legs, one can say, in civil society, what we are doing. And the one is to give advice and provide shelters and develop knowledge from that. To work in groups, and as I said, to protect women and give places to be if you want to leave your relationship. We also have a very important role, and that is to carry the voice, röstbärare in Swedish. We are supposed to return our knowledge to society and lobby for laws and policies grounded in what we see in our work. And this is a very rooted thought in the Swedish society, that the civil society is funded by the state with a lot of money in order to be this röstbärare, in order to carry a voice which is supposed to be a critique of the power. We are supposed to be the ones that are fighting and putting forward other solutions if we find them better. So that is a very, very important task we have. And from the 1990s and up to this year, the fundings have been large in many ways. As you see, between, I think it's 2010 and 17, the finance increased with 400% of the women's shelters. We cannot complain that we have not money enough as up to now. And this means that many of our shelters can employ persons who work with the women and the children, and we can have grow and have places where women can come and live, and children. But we see a shift in policy, I would say, and also a shift in the politics around violence against women. I'm not going to talk about the political shift here, but I would say that we are moving away from, well, since long moving away from a feminist understanding. During the 90s, the shelter movement, and not least together with Professor Liz Kelly, made huge and important interventions in the Swedish politics on violence against women. And an understanding that was quite close to our way of seeing things was found at the core of the political power. But this has shifted. The language used has shifted. Now we see more of a medical approach. Violence is talked about not so much as a gender and power question, but very much folkhälsa, public health question. It's framed within this health frame, and with that follows that it is de-radicalized in many ways that worry us a bit, and it also is very easily linked to notions of deviance, the perpetrator's deviance, or the victim, that she is deviant in being an addict, or being unemployed, or being foreign, or these things that makes it hard to see the violence. So these shifts then, come on, fastnat. Doesn't work. We had this important shift in the law regarding the municipalities' responsibilities for victims. It used to say that the municipality ought to take responsibility for these women. It was shifted, and many in our movement, we were quite not sure about this. Was it good or was it bad? Some wanted it, some wanted it not. But we pushed for it as a movement, saying that we want this ought to be shall, the municipality shall take responsibility. What has happened then is that the social services are the ones who are responsible. That means that they are paying for these things, which means that when we are having our shelters, they decide, if they are paying, they also decide who comes to live and stay with us. And in that sense, when we accept women who come through the social services, otherwise women have to pay themselves and many can't afford it, then we perform social services. And then we fall under a big legal umbrella that we used to be outside before, which means that we have to keep journals, we have to be open to different kinds of revisions and so of our what we are doing. So it came with a lot of responsibility and a change of our what we are doing. So we get no compensation. We used to be able to decide ourselves who gets to come here, but now the social services call us and say, we have a woman, do you have any rooms? And we say yes, if we have, of course, and then she comes. Maybe not. Oh. So where there's money, tends to be a crowd. So once the municipality has to finance this, we can see new actors coming to the table, if I may say so. It's private housings with sometimes very fancy commercial for what they are doing, saying, well, stay at our shelter. We have a nice view over a lake where you can relax and put the bad things behind you. We see all sorts of quite strange things said. They can also say, we can pick you up any time at night, while if you call a woman's shelter, you might have to wait until the morning or wait a few hours for us to get one of our volunteers to help the woman. But they say, we have a car, we can pick you up, we can pick your stuff up, we have places where you can put your stuff, and so, which we really can't compete with. But what we have is something completely different. We have, as I explained, a whole view on the woman and something that we are working with for her to get out of the violence. This money that has also given us the opportunity to employ staff sometimes causes a tension between the employees and the volunteers, because are we going to follow, if you have a job, sometimes you want to keep that job, so you might be more keen on to obey what is said by the authorities, that we should go in this direction or we should move on and be more and more like this, while the volunteers don't care at all, say, no, this is politically totally wrong, we want to go this way. So it's, these things also happen. Thank you. Yeah, to sum up, what we see is a new and ever-increasing focus on security. And we heard it before, that I think before lunch here it was said that public spaces has a focus, I can't remember, but security is sort of a buzzword. And security tends then to mean, do you have bulletproof windows? We get calls from these experts on security saying, I can come and check your shelter up so it's safe, and the doors and the locks and stuff. But we are working with securing the women by giving her the right tools and strengthening her. That is by far the best way to think of security. And risk assessments, am I running out of time? No. This means that once you start thinking of shelters not as a movement involving women who might have been in a violent relation, might have lived on a shelter and stay and work as volunteers or as employees, and you share these experiences as women, instead you think of security and that those who are fleeing are under concrete threat. That might not at all be the case, as I said. But we've seen that now it's more and more related to risk assessments to get a placement at a shelter. You have to be really exposed to threats. which means that many women don't get the place to stay at the shelter unless they pay themselves, which can be expensive. And this also means that women comes from the crime scene. The social securities take her and put her with us. And she might not at all be ready to be in a shelter. They use us as a crisis center, and they don't finance us to be bigger, to have more, to be able to cater for these other women as well. Sorry, I'm getting hot here. And if you combine this with that the situation for women now, that there's nowhere to stay in Sweden, and I guess in many other countries, the situation on the housing market is very hard. So women sometimes stay for a year. And during this year, they have so hard problems that it's such a complex situation that the women's shelter might not be the place for her to be. Society should cater for her in other ways. And she meets so many experts, she meets so many therapists, she meets the healthcare. So when it's time to speak to a shelter woman, she doesn't want that. She's just shutting down. I can't find the strength to talk to one more person. And this is a bad circle, because then our volunteers are not feeling that they are giving the help that they want to give. They are being more like standing in a soup kitchen, not be able to give back, and not having the training, because these very hard cases are not meant to be dealt with by civil society. Here society should step in with other tools. And the last thing here, focus on the individual's right. This is a paradox, because human rights has been put forward in the authorities' work with what we are doing. They say that to be able to protect children who come to shelters, they need to be seen as subjects of their own, subjects carrying rights of their own. So the social services can't only place the woman and say, bring your children, it's your decision. They need to make a formal decision that the children should be placed as well. And this is due to the fact that the children needs to be able to complain, because that is, once you are giving the services of an authority, you have the right to complain on that authority if they treat you bad. And since we are executing the authorities' power or mandate, or we take money from them, everyone who comes to us must be able to complain on the help we are giving. And this also means, well, but that's not, I mean, please complain if you need it. That's not the case. But once you give the kid a placement of its own, then the father can go and say, no, I don't want that to happen. I appeal on this thing, and it can delay the process even more. And also it said that since you are taking care of children, you need to have a special person responsible for that. Of course, we already have that, but that person needs a lot of training. You need to be staffed 24 hours around the clock, and things that we have difficulties to manage in our what we're doing, because that costs a lot. And when you read these utredningar, the state, evaluations, yes, thank you, of the shelter movements, sometimes you're not sure if is it dangerous to stay at a shelter for a kid, or is it dangerous to live in a violent relationship? It's sort of, they've lost focus that what we are doing is actually taking children out of violent lives, giving them their first Christmas without fear, giving them the ability to sleep without fear and stuff on. But the thing is, it's not meant for women and children to stay for a year in our apartments. So that's what the society should be taking care of instead, we think. So what is happening today is worst cases, as I said, is placed at the shelters. And these are interpreted as foreign women. I'm not saying that it is the worst cases, but we've sort of taken on that picture. The authorities seems to be having that kind of glasses. So I think it's 70% of the women who are living in shelters today, our shelters, are foreign women. And this is, of course, not because women more integrated or speaking perfect Swedish and stuff doesn't need the shelters, but we don't have place for them. And they don't identify coming to a place with bulletproof glasses and sort of, this is high security. We are not that, but that's how shelters more and more are perceived. Yeah, I've said these things. Yeah, and we feel in this process we are not also able to develop the knowledge that is so vital to our movement, because we are ultimately sometimes dealing with cases that we are just giving support where the professionals are helping these women. And we think that we should make much more use if society shifted this way forward. We are very worried that we are slowly transformed into something that hasn't this more bigger and contextualized uppgift. Task. Thank you. Oh, sorry. So, yeah, I don't think I had did I have another slide? I don't think so. Yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, I'm just wrapping it up there. And this is very worrying, and this is combined with shifting ways of financing us. I said, up till now, we've had a lot of money, but not by far enough money, of course, I must say. But now they are changing the ways of also financing the shelter movement, inviting other actors in. So we have to compete for the money, and we are transformed, as I said, to something different. So maybe in 5-6 years, the shelter movement have gone underground. I think that was my last, because we have to decide what we want to give to society and what we can be. As it is now, we feel that we're not giving back knowledge. We're just taking care of a problem, not helping to solve it, and not making progress. So maybe we have to say no to money and go underground and start all over again, and being these groups who are taking in women, discussing, reading, finding out what do we want, what do we know, and how can we work forward. Yeah, with this a bit sad and worrying picture, I wrap it up. And thank you very much for inviting me here and for listening also. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for such a comprehensive overview, not only historical one, but also about what ROX has been and the challenges that you have right now as an organization, and, well, the challenges also of the future with a different political societal landscape in terms of values and changes and everything. I have a couple of questions, but I would first like to open questions to the audience. Any questions? Yes. Yeah, I think I can give you this. Is it you? Yeah.
Thanks. I have a short question. In your method of working with women who take a decision, I'm wondering in that method how you're thinking within the process of normalization is also known that the necessity to break something, and how do you work with that then in relation to it's the women's decision? I understand, but do you understand my question?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But when the woman comes, it's often some kind of crisis that has a tipping point in some way.
But in the normalization process, the knowledge of the necessity to actually break somewhere there.
Yeah.
Because the victim, the person, is not capable of taking the decision.
Yes.
That is my question.
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah, we are very clear always when we speak to her that the violence is not her fault and that she is a victim of violence. We say it, we talk about it, we name it violence, because she often wants to call it something else. So it's it's often not a fight, but struggle over getting her to see it as violence and to realize that this was wrong and you are better off without him. But, and this is, of course, something that goes on when we accompany her in every day and when we have this samtal. But it's not a method that intervene and say this and that. It's just being very clear all the time that this is violence, this is not acceptable. But she has to come to it herself. She really has to feel it. And she does it by hearing us saying it and experiencing other things without this man. But if we push on her that you have to leave him or you have to, it will only sort of get her to think that we don't understand. I know my man, and you think he's bad, but I know that he has this kind of. So and it is hard. It is hard. You can be very frustrated sometimes. But if it doesn't come from her, it won't last. So.
Any other question? Okay. Can you tell the question and then we repeat it here because we are not. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, in our task to carry voices, from what we see, what voices are the most underestimated? Oh, wow, that's a very, very good question. Well, I think today it is, I think Me Too, the Me Too movement in Sweden is a good example of how it works in this country, because you can hear voices and at the same time don't listen to them. And I would say that the most underestimated voices are the ones that keep saying that violence is spread through the society. It's something that is important for women inside and outside violent relationships. And because the Me Too movement have been, I will get to your, I hope I will answer, but I'm taking a detour. The Me Too movement has been very successful in a way in Sweden. It has gained a lot of place in the media coverage, and politically they have managed to give demands that the government has said, we are going to listen to these demands. We give it to Jämställdhetsmyndigheten, the authority for gender equality that we have. So they have formulated their demands. The thing is, why do in Sweden, with a shelter movement that goes 35 years back, research on violence against women that has said these things about violence, that the Me Too movement now is repeating, namely it exists every day at workplaces. We know it exists every day in the public spheres. Why don't they take that as a receipt for what we have said in the research and ask the researchers or the shelter movement, what are your demands Instead, they go to the latest person who just woke up yesterday, in some ways, saying, look, I see this. So I think that this, the most underestimated voice in a Swedish society, almost obsessed with violence, is the ones that talk about everyday violence as something important, which we in the shelter movement can see, because it's just not when you are abused that you should come to a shelter. You should be able to come much earlier. You should be able to come when you say, I'm fed up with being called a whore, so I go and have a coffee at the shelter. I might sleep over here because I don't want to go home. And these women are gradually pushed out of our what we are doing. We don't meet them so much anymore. And what we hear instead is those who might survive a tremendous and very, very painful and violent relationship. They can be covered and listened to in ways that we wish that the larger picture would appear clearer in order not to have those horrific, very hard and violent relations. Was that an answer?
Okay, we are nearly stopping for coffee. I actually have a question. There was a report not long a time ago showing that not all municipalities in Sweden give support. How is the distribution today? And embedded in this question, I would like to highlight something that Fiona said in her presentation about the context in the rural women, because some of the, I think, the mechanisms of that how rural women would be more exposed and the isolation, geographic, could be perhaps make women more vulnerable just because of the geographic isolation, the norms of local communities and things like that. Can you shortly just highlight a little bit on these two aspects?
Sorry.
The first one is about the geographic distribution of the women's shelter. Mm-hmm. And the second is actually whether the support for women is tailored by the kinds of context that they are. Mm.
Yeah, well, the geographical, many times women don't stay at the shelter where they live. They move to a different municipality. So it's not always super important that there's a shelter everywhere. And also in small towns and villages, it's a problem. You can't stay because you might not want to. You say instead, I'm going on a vacation. You don't want people to know that you stay at the shelter. So therefore, it's good to be able to move somewhere else, totally. And the other question was...
It's about how the services are tailored
by
the context the women are.
Yeah, we try, of course, to tailor the context, but also we are not... we don't, for example, take women with drug abuse because we feel we don't have the skills to do that. And also, as I said, we don't wish to have women with heavy psychiatrical problems and stuff, because we are not the ones that should do that. But of course, we try to tailor the services towards to meet and to see the women and so. And I forgot the question of the voices. Of course, the children's voices are the ones that are totally neglected, even by me now. So that's the answer to that question.
Okay, I think we stop now for a coffee, but before that, I just would like to say thank you for all the participants of the speakers of this session. Karin, Johanna, Jenny, and also Christy that made it possible this, that Karin could be with us today. Thank you very much.